Welcome back to another episode of Light Beer, Dark Money. I'm Sean Noble.
And I'm Chris Clements.
And we are honored today.
We are honored to have Mr. John Hart.
The one and only.
The one and only John Hart from C3 Solutions. And, oh my gosh, we've had him here before. And John's resume is so extensive and so amazing that it's too hard to even
the most important part of his resume is the fact that he was both a longtime staffer and co-author with the late Senator Tom Coburn.
Yeah.
Which is how we met. Which was, that was how many years ago, John? We've talked about this before.
Gosh, it was 25 years ago.
25 years ago.
So this is we're all very historic. I just turned 50, which is the historic birthday. I'm not going to put you guys on the spot, but I suspect
we've both been there.
We're all the same generation.
So it's interesting you bring up 50 because I need to give a shout out to my lovely wife, Sasha, who celebrated 50, half a century yesterday. So if I'm
there you go.
a little slow this morning, it's because I still have Binkley's restaurant, prefix 12-course meal coursing through my veins.
There you go.
But
happy birthday, Sasha.
Yeah, so happy birthday to her. And turning 50 is always an interesting milestone. You're not quite sure if you're going up or you're going down. I think
for the three of us, we're all definitely going up. Absolutely.
We're going up. It's like you're in the third quarter. You kind of figured out what you're going to do for the next 50 years, hopefully, and make the most of your time.
Right?
Yeah. Remember when Bono turned 50? I thought that was old. I'm like, oh my gosh, my boyhood hero is 50.
Speaking of Bono, let's jump right into that because Bono was at the State of the Union.
He was.
We did a little preview of the State of the Union last week, so now you get a chance to hear us talk about.
Now we've endured it.
We've endured it. We got through it.
I had forgotten about it, actually. I was doing something, and then our good friend John Dester, who was on last week, texted me, and he said, Bono in the house. And I said, what house? He said, the Congress. I go, what? Why the Congress? And he says, it's the State of the Union, you knucklehead. I go, I probably should watch that because we're going to be doing a show.
Well, and you texted me, and I had let time slip away, so I had to turn it on. I missed the entrance, but...
the entrance was classic because I don't really believe that President Biden actually knew where he was or what he was doing.
I don't know. I felt like he was pretty okay, just lucid. I don't know. John, what do you think?
It's a very low bar, I think, Sean, since you and I both worked on Capitol Hill. I think it was Senator Cassidy, actually, in all seriousness, suggested there should be a minimum cognitive competence test for members of Congress. And I'm not going to name names, but I think walking through the cafeteria, there are certain members and senators often who had to have 2 or 3 escorts, with them, staffers taking them through to make sure they wouldn't get lost. And so it's a real problem where we have in our political system this acceptance that you can serve, way past your prime.
Yeah.
Well, it's your prime, your ability to be cognitive.
To be cognitive.
Well, you've certainly seen that on the Senate side.
Well, and it's happened on the House. And I'll give you a story about when I first realized this. I was a very young staffer. I was in my first year on the Hill. Shattuck had just been elected, and we were doing the beginnings of the Waco hearings. So it was a subcommittee of the Judiciary Committee and a subcommittee of the Government Reform and Oversight Committee, which Shattuck sat on. So that was it was a joint investigative committee, and I can't remember the name of the member because he was gone within 1 or 2 cycles after that. But I remember his chief of staff was ancient. I mean, his chief of staff had to be 50. No, he was definitely older than 50. But this member was super old, and I could see the chief of staff sitting behind him, writing, and just handing him paper, and he was just taking the paper, reading it, as the chief of staff was writing what he was saying in this committee. And I was astounded.
Well, back then it was handwritten. Now it's the teleprompter.
Well, but this was just, this wasn't even like prepared remarks. This was just like, he was answering questions I mean, I was so astounded. I was like, this guy literally is being handled by staff.
Yeah.
To the very point that they're telling him what to say. I was just blown away as a 24-year-old kid. Just
I've often thought, watching judiciary hearings, Jerry Nadler is being just told what to say.
Well, not back then, but now for sure. But it goes to your point, John, that there definitely should be. I mean, we're talking about leaders in our country. They need to at least have the cognitive ability to think for themselves. I don't know. Too much to ask?
Well, and with Biden, frankly, it's such a very low bar. And I think, he was praised for the way he handled the back and forth in the chamber. But I thought it was shameful. It was disgraceful. It was probably one of the worst State of the Unions that I've ever seen. I just think it was stridently partisan. It was full on. He turned the demagoguery up to 11.
My goodness, yes, that's right.
And Biden has a history of doing this. Back when Paul Ryan put out the roadmap and he was, running with Romney, he made this remark that Ryan wants to, quote, put you all back in chains.
Right.
Yeah.
So to invoke kind of slave trader rhetoric is so disgusting that he would bring that kind of tone into the debate. But that's who Biden is. I mean, this was a very old school, left-wing, progressive, Puritan, demagogic State of the Union. And the Bono thing, is an opportunity where he could have taken the high ground, as our hero writes so eloquently in his new memoir that Chris and I have read at least once or listened to.
It's better to listen to it.
Exactly. It's definitely better to listen to it.
Because there's music involved and some interesting anecdotes.
Yeah.
Yeah, is that when we reach for higher ground, we find common ground.
Right.
And he could have used that moment. And the PEPFAR example, that's a very recent example in our history. This is not, you don't have to go back to the era of powdered wigs. This was just 10, 15 years ago when the Bush administration worked with both sides. And really, it was an international coalition where you had celebrity activists, you had, quote, religious conservatives working together to address the AIDS crisis in Africa, very artfully, very responsibly. And it was an example of, what we call benevolent self-interest, where it was in the United States' interest to develop and reinforce countries in Africa and help their development in a positive direction, because we live in a multipolar world where China is in there right now trying to pull them away and pull them into the more authoritarian camp. So, but he didn't do any of that. He just completely fumbled it. And it was just in spirit with a very kind of, it was a lower ground. It wasn't a higher ground State of the Union.
Well,
it was
absolutely. Well, at that moment, what was interesting, and I was waiting for that moment. I was sitting on the couch waiting for the moment when he was going to turn or do, to recognize the fact that Bono was there and the achievements that he had made in a bipartisan fashion, working with both Democrats and Republicans to get this done. Going and breaking bread with Jesse Helms, going and talking with George W. Bush, and creating some sort of bridge between the two parties at that moment. But then he just kept going. And if you noticed, when he began his discussion of PEPFAR, Kevin McCarthy got up, started clapping, and turns towards where Bono's sitting up in the gallery, along with Kamala Harris. They're all clapping, and Joe just keeps talking, and he doesn't even mention Bono.
Yeah.
I go, what a my reaction was exactly the same. What another missed opportunity.
Yeah, it was sad. Well, I want to show you one photo while I'm here. This is me. I don't think you can see it with the glare, but this is me with Bono.
Oh yeah. I think you showed that the last time you were on the pod.
Yeah. I'll do
John,
every time I watch.
And that was at the prayer breakfast.
John should show that picture anytime he's talking to anybody, because that's pretty awesome.
No, and that was at the.
I've got my family, my kids, and then of course my. I don't do a me wall. Coburn always criticized people that had the photos of themselves with the people, but I make an exception.
Yeah.
In this case, so.
I do. I took that criticism personally, in the sense that I remember early on in my career getting photos when members are, famous people come in to do fundraisers. But the two things that kept me from keeping those and putting them on the wall were, one, it was a little bit, of self-flattery. But the real reason is because I was fat. I'd look terrible. I was a fat staffer back in the 90s, early 2000s.
What was that pizza?
As Joe Scarborough famously said, fat pink boys.
Right.
Fat pink boys.
With their blue blazers, with their gold buttons, and
Exactly.
I could say something.
Overweight and overwrought.
I could say something else. I'm just not going to do it.
Yeah, Sean, you guys keep in pretty good shape. I got a farm to maintain, so that's part of my workout.
And you have your kids working on your farm.
That's right.
Yeah, I saw some pictures of that the other day. I'm like, that is great.
That's great. Going back to your point about how Biden, it was one of the worst examples of the State of the Union that you've seen. I agree. It diminishes the office of the president to get into this back and forth with, the rabble rousers in the House. And, Obama didn't, Bush didn't fall for it. Obama didn't fall for it. Obviously, Trump did because he's Trump. But you'd think that Biden, who wants to be the adult in the room, would not have had stooped to that level. But to point out what you had said earlier, that really is who Biden is. He's always been kind of a scrapper, and he's going to say outrageous things because, that's his personality. But the thing that was the most interesting to me was the news reports that talked about White House staff high-fiving each other and cheering when Biden got into the back and forth with the Republicans in the House during the speech. And it just goes to show that he surrounded himself with people who are partisan hacks that don't value the office.
You got it.
And they don't really want to find common ground to move the country forward. This is just a partisan hackery for them.
No, that's exactly what it was. And I'm sure you guys remember it was back in 2009 when Joe Wilson, congressman, famously shouted out and said to Obama that you lie. And it was in reference to a point he was making about immigration, but that was a big controversy back then. And so now we've seen how the State of the Union has kind of, again, has gone downhill and degenerated. So on one hand, you can look at an example of the UK Parliament where there's question time.
Right.
Yeah.
We could probably benefit from question time, quite frankly, but where there's that back and forth and it's boisterous and it's loud. And that's part of their political culture in the UK. But in the United States, the presidency is the leader, not just of our country, but of the free world. And so there's been a higher expectation of dignity and authority within the office. And I think that's been degraded. And I think it hurts our standing internationally when other authoritarian regimes look at that back and forth. It makes the United States look smaller. It makes the world a less safe place because it emboldens bad actors who are bullies.
No question.
And it was just a moment of weakness that was really, and again, Sean, to your point is the reaction to it was very telling, not just with White House staff, but there was a lot of high-fiving in kind of the quote mainstream media of, complimenting the president for his brilliant handling of, Republicans and Medicare. And it was a rehash of the demagoguery that you and I dealt with every day, when we were staffers. And there was nothing imaginative about it. There was nothing creative, nothing redeeming. And it was so out of step, again, with his mention of PEPFAR and the Bush example. And Frank, the other thing that people have to keep in mind is when the reason they were high-fiving each other too is because the White House knows full well the Republican Party is in the midst of its own civil war, just to put a very blunt framing on it. Right. So like in your state, you guys are dealing with, there's two stop the steal, factions in the GOP right now. There's one that's fighting the fake fight, I would argue, around elections that weren't lost, or that whole fallacious claim. But then there's the real stop the steal around the loss of our freedom, the loss of our capital, the loss of our tax dollars and being spent on things that provide absolutely no benefit but expand the administrative state. So the White House doesn't want to empower the latter camp. They don't want to see the GOP coming back to its senses. They want to see the crybaby conservatives prevail. They want to see dark MAGA, in charge of the GOP because they know it's easier to beat.
Yeah.
Well, and you saw that on full display the other night, in some respects.
Right.
I for one am not in favor of these outbursts during the State of the Union address on either side. I think it demeans both the presidency and demeans the office, those individual office holders. It's the reason they do it is because they're sitting there raising money while they're doing it. Look what I did. It's all about them. It has nothing to do with actually the issues.
And that's a good point.
And then you put yourself in a place later on where, you can't refute the policy issues.
Sure.
And there was plenty of policy meat he threw out there in terms of the expansion of the entitlement state that should have been talked about, that should have been debated, that should have been given attention. And all we were talking about afterwards were his flubs, his blubs, and the Republicans, shouting at him. Yeah. Versus what he proposed, which, one of the lead editorials in the Wall Street Journal today is by Daniel Henninger. Joe Biden is Bernie Sanders. Yeah. Democrats thought a socialist couldn't win the presidency in 2020. Well, they've got one now for 2024. And that should be a concern. Those are the things we should be debating. Those are the things we should be, that's the things we should be shouting out on.
Yeah, that's a good point. And I think you do have to be fair and point out that, McCarthy urged his caucus to not react in real time.
Oh, right. He was not happy with it. You could tell.
Yeah,
come on.
and so yeah, it's fair to fault the members that did offer the outburst because, again, to your point, is it detracted from the very real debates. But again, I would in that setting, the person with the most responsibility to set the right tone is the one with the most power, and that's, again, President Biden. He was elected to be different. He was elected to not be Donald Trump. That was his mandate. His mandate wasn't to be a socialist. It wasn't to expand the administrative state. It was to not be Donald Trump and to kind of restore American civil society, American culture around civil debate. And he didn't do that.
Well, and he's playing to, his left flank as much as he can. And so the old wheeler dealer Joe Biden, or, someone who could, work across the aisle, that Joe Biden was gone a long time ago. I mean, I think you made an interesting reference to, something he said in his past, and that is when he made that comment that they'll put you all back in chains. Everything changed in terms of how people deal with Joe Biden because it was so egregious and so ridiculous.
That's right. Yeah, and again, just to share another State of the Union personal story to show how things have changed is when Obama gave his first State of the Union, and he walked down the aisle as he was, I think he was leaving. I can't remember if it was the beginning or the end. He stopped to greet his good friend Tom Coburn, and they gave each other a big hug on national television, and that got people's attention. And as a staffer, that was one of the proudest things that I got to defend was Coburn's integrity and willingness to embrace the other. Right. And Coburn never pulled punches on policy. He never withheld criticism, but he also never apologized for embracing the American tradition of principled pluralism, where whenever two ideas are allowed to grapple freely, whoever knew truth to be penned in a free and open exchange. That was Milton writing 100 years before the First Amendment. That is the foundation of America, and Coburn lived that out, and he got a lot done. He was very effective, but he didn't do it. He wasn't trying to, quote, own the libs. He was trying to persuade the libs.
Right. That's a great distinction.
That's what Biden hasn't grasped.
Yeah, it is amazing. And I guess it shouldn't be surprising that we're in this state of affairs. But you look at how much the presidency has devolved in the last few years. It does. I mean, I know a bunch of Democrats who long for the days of George W. Bush, or did while Trump was president. And now that we're in the Biden presidency, we all wish it was Obama. I mean, I don't know if we got to get it back to normal somehow, and I don't know how to do that.
Well, I think we have to reapply the founders' timeless principles to today's challenges. And so I think normal is always changing. So we're never gonna go back to the 90s. We shouldn't go back to the 90s. We can't go back to the 2010s. There's a lot that we got wrong in those eras, but there are some things we got right. But I think the big challenge we face just in our politics is we're living through the greatest media technological disruption since the printing press was invented hundreds of years ago. So we're still living through that and dealing with the implications of everybody being a publisher, of having, a lie can circle the earth 10 times before the truth gets its pants on. And it's really hard to compete in that environment. And Trump was an accelerant for that trend. He understood it. He capitalized on it. So what we have to do is identify leaders and elevate leaders and help them who understand how the media landscape has changed and how communication technology has changed, but will bring transcendent true values to those new opportunities and challenges. And then we have to create a new normal that that is based on ancient truths about people, about government, about the role of the individual in the state.
Well said.
That's why we have John on.
Yeah. Well, John, tell us a little bit about the work that you're doing with C3, and you had a piece that was sent out yesterday, about the radical sort of environmental solutions being proposed by this administration and this president, and specifically what he got wrong and what a more sober reality might be with some of your prescriptions.
Yeah, and I think that the headline was, Biden's demagoguery is an existential threat to climate progress.
Exactly.
And what I mean by that is, look, as a conservative and as a farmer now, I've always believed very, very deeply in this idea of stewardship, and that just my personal faith. I think God created the world. We have an obligation to take responsibility for it and to care for it and to leave the world better off than we found it. And that's a principle that's true, whether it's with finances, whether it's with your natural environment, your economic environment. That's something that's very much within the conservative DNA. And if we want to see, again, the goal isn't to save the Republican Party. The goal is to save the Republic. But if the Republican Party can organize itself around ideas and propositional concepts about what we're already for, we can, again, win those debates. We can persuade the libs and get people to understand what we're arguing for. So with C3 Solutions, what we do is argue that, look, if you believe that we ought to take care of the environment, you ought to embrace these principles of economic freedom. And we have a great study that we put out. Nick Loris wrote it, who was previously at the Heritage Foundation. And it's called Free Economies or Clean Economies. And it's a very simple concept. He looked at the Heritage Index of Economic Freedom that measures things like low tax rates, less government, less regulation. And then he did an overlay, and he looked at the Yale Environmental Performance Index. And what we found was that the countries that are cleaner are those that embrace these principles of economic freedom. So free economies are roughly twice as free rather, free economies are twice as clean as less free economies. And an example that, again, because we're historic, we'll remember the end of the Cold War, that the line of demarcation between the East and West, it wasn't just the Berlin Wall. There was literally a line of soot in Berlin between the East and West, where the East, the communist side, was dirty, and the West, the free side, was clean. And that's principle has been true for a long, long time. President Reagan understood it. His National Security Council identified issues of the environment as a landscape of issues that can be used to defeat totalitarian states, and that's still true today. And so what we're trying to do is to help conservatives, frankly, be comfortable talking about the things they already believe in, and applying the economic principles we already believe in to the challenge of the environment. And we're not alarmists. We're not saying that, look, the earth is going to, ecosystem is going to collapse in 10 years. But on the other hand, we say, look, there's really good evidence that humans are part of the contributing factor to climate change. And again, it's sort of like acknowledging that when your car has exhaust, you don't want to like put your face on it and breathe it. It's just, there's a common sense element here where it's okay to admit that there are, quote, externalities. There are things in a capitalist free market system that are undesirable. But capitalist systems have the ability to self-correct and to develop cleaner technologies. So like I'm looking out my window right now in a valley that is full of beautiful trees, okay? But 150, 200 years ago, this valley was almost completely clear cut to fire up the Antietam Ironworks. So we were literally burning wood, burning our forests to produce steel and iron. And then we discovered something called coal. So, and everyone, coal's dirty, coal's bad. Well, coal actually saved the trees.
Right.
Yeah.
Because we transitioned away from burning trees to burning coal.
Well, and so did natural gas, by the way.
And natural gas. So and right, like one of the
even
things
more trees.
Yeah, is that the most significant emissions reduction technology in the past 25 years isn't renewables, it's natural gas. So when the fracking revolution lowered the rate of emissions much more significantly than anything else that's been done. And it does it like we're for, Drew, a co-founder, a friend, he has a solar company. We're all for renewables, but we're for an all of the above energy strategy. Whereas the left is for everything but fossil fuels, everything but nuclear energy that their base doesn't want them to support. So that's what we're about.
That's awesome.
Well, I mean, that was one of the biggest, whoppers that Biden, told the other day in his speech that we've got 10 more years left of fossil fuels, and then we'll be done with those things. I mean, and it was just one of those things that everybody laughed at him because it's just not true. Well, and that's not to discount the motions we're making with renewables, but this idea that fossil fuels are somehow going to go away. Are you going to fly airplanes with electricity? I don't think so.
Not in the short term. No. I'll tell you who's not laughing is Joe Manchin. Oh. He's unhappy.
Oh,
and that's not good for Biden if he's trying to get some stuff done, because Manchin, we don't know whether he's running for re-election yet or not. And if he does, he's going to have to do some things to appeal to some Republicans more so than he's done now. So it'll be very interesting to watch. Yeah, right. All the Republicans.
Well, we've talked about it on the show. I'm just amazed that he keeps putting up with all of it. If he's running for governor, if he decides that he's running for Senate again, he's got to make a decision here quickly. And running as a Democrat in West Virginia, I don't know if that's a workable.
Yeah, I'll give you guys a quick. I was just actually at an event with Manchin a few days ago. So one of the projects I've stayed engaged with is called the Millennial Debt Commission, and the idea is just getting millennials, the generation, engaged on issues of fiscal responsibility. And Manchin was the first speaker that they had. I did a panel later with Doug Holtz-Eakin and Austin Smythe, who helped work on the roadmap. That was, again, the plan to put you all in chains. Austin was one of the guys behind that. But Manchin talked, he made a very, very important point that's going to be an increasingly a front burner issue in our politics, is the interest payments on the national debt. This issue goes in cycles. Like Sean will remember, in the 90s, early 2000s, everybody was talking about size of government spending. but none of those things don't go away. They just get kind of put to the back burner, and other hot button issues, take their place. But we're spending every year right now $400 billion just on interest payments. That's the size of Norway's GDP. And over the course of about 10 years, the interest payments on the debt are going to eclipse what we spend on Medicare and also defense. So all of those dollars, that's real money. That's real money that's not in your pocket. It's not in the private sector.
Right.
It's not going to businesses, entrepreneurs. And so again, if you care about, quote, climate change, then you ought to be doing everything you can to make sure people have the finances to innovate, to develop new breakthroughs and new technologies. And every dollar we take out of the private sector is a dollar that delays, quote, climate action. And there's a lot of things that conservatives would support around either basic research or infrastructure. The Constitution gives us the authority to have a national defense from the federal government, but also to regulate interstate commerce. And so there's definitely a legitimate federal role in some infrastructure. And we're lagging behind because we've allowed infrastructure to become a special interest project. And this was the whole crux of the earmark debate, which we successfully fought, but that was all reversed,
right.
in the Trump era.
We got a lot of problems in this country.
Yeah,
Nobody seems to want to deal with them.
Well, John's dealing with them.
Yeah. Well,
At least he's writing about it.
I mean,
we talk about it.
He and Drew,
do
saw a lane that wasn't being addressed within the conservative movement,
Right.
and said, "Hey, listen, we can stand up for the environment and not destroy our economy all at the same time. We can stand up for ecology and still be fervent, Adam Smithsonian capitalists."
Yeah, free marketers. No question.
And that takes a lot of guts because the other side is much louder and much more organized and much more, I would say, militant.
Well,
on
militant
this issue, because it's more like a religion to them than it is, a public policy prescription.
It's all about command and control.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, and I think the challenge is, and you guys both, obviously follow politics closely, but in Arizona, because it's a complicated, hot mess of a state right now.
Yep.
Every state is in its own unique way, isn't it? But is to get it's a mistake when people criticize, quote, the populace. Okay, so if you want your ideas to prevail and become law, they have to be popular. They have to have popular support. And I think what Coburn did so well, and Shattuck understood this too, is that you have to fuse populism with really good policy. Mm-hmm. So you can't have either a grass tops kind of an elite strategy, and you can't have solely a grassroots strategy. You have to merge both and fuse those two strategies, and identify these non-traditional issues sometimes where you think, gosh, the GOP is not going to, a lot of base voters aren't automatically going to care about climate in the way that you think they will. But when you start to probe what they actually believe, they're already with you. And if you can mobilize people around constructive solutions, you can begin to win some of these battles. But again, Biden doesn't want that to happen. He wants the GOP to be taken over by, again, conspiracy theorists. That's who he wants to be in charge. And for someone that claims he loves democracy, he only likes it as long as Democrats win. And that's, we've got to call him out on that and help our own side, be better. But again, leadership, the easiest thing in politics is to criticize the other side, but leaders criticize their own side before they go after the other side, and they reform from within. And that's what I think we've got to be about in our movement.
Yeah, no question. Yeah. Well, and speaking of, this is a good segue into how do you see 2024 presidential campaign, particularly on the Republican side? Nikki Haley looks like she's going to, jump in
next week.
We're assuming that Pence is going to jump in. We're assuming Pompeo is going to jump in. I mean, Larry Hogan could jump in. Chris Sununu's talking about it. John, what do you think? What are you hearing? And Glenn Youngkin from Virginia, seriously looking at it. So
yeah, I mean, Yeah, I mean, it's
Glenn needs
yeah,
to save Virginia a little bit longer, I think. That's just my personal opinion.
Well, he's only get one in Virginia. You only get one term.
Yeah.
So if a presidential election is halfway through your one term, that's your chance to take a look, I guess.
Yeah, look, the great thing is we've, on the GOP side, we've got a very, very deep bench of very competent, qualified people. But just to address the orange elephant in the room is how are we going to, as a party, navigate the post-Trump era?
Mm-hmm.
And again, it's my position is, I mean, I think it's nuanced. Some people might not, but I think of myself as an after-Trumper, whereas I was very critical of Trump when he ran in 2016. I voted for him in 2020 because he frankly proved me wrong that he didn't live up to my worst fears and apprehensions. But after 2020, he reverted to becoming a worse version of what I thought he could be. And so I think we absolutely have to move past Trump as a person. And there really was never an establishment of a set of ideas around Trump. Trumpism was Trump, the person, the personality. It's the guy that was very reactionary. He was always commenting on the last thing someone said about him. And he's lost the last 3 election cycles. So when you look at his results, he's frankly a loser. And that is fatal to his brand of being a winner.
Right.
So we've got to pivot away from him. And thankfully, we've got, Ron DeSantis, Nikki Haley, who I think is she's going to jump in a few days. And Sean, like John Lerner, who I assume, he was Coburn's consultant, Nikki Haley's consultant. Very, very smart guy, very strategic. So I think she'll run a great race. DeSantis, is getting a lot done. I mean, he has a record of accomplishment in Florida, and he's already demonstrated a willingness to punch back at Trump. I mean, when Trump, just put the picture of him with, some, girls when he was a 20-something-year-old, he said, look, I'm focused on getting results. I'm not going to smear other Republicans.
No, his responses or non-responses have been brilliant.
Yeah.
Very well restrained, and actually in the way that even makes Trump even look more foolish and more petty and more buffoonish.
Yeah. So I'm fairly optimistic. Like I think there's a lot of candidates who could emerge as the standard bearer. We'll all remember, there were moments when Scott Walker was going to be that guy, or whether it's Jeb Bush. And so oftentimes the person that everyone's talking about right now often does not end up being the nominee, whether it's, DeSantis is the hot brand currently. He may well remain that and may continue to ascend because of the uniqueness of this particular post-Trump moment. And he's an acceptable Trumpy candidate to a lot of people. But again, we'll see. There's definitely an opening for Nikki Haley, for Glenn Youngkin, and even some that are more, quote, moderate, whether it's, Sununu, New Hampshire, or Hogan, who just was in Maryland. We'll see. It's going to be an exciting thing to watch. But I think what we're trying to do as an organization is lift up a set of issues that candidate, whoever that candidate is, can take and run with and say, we've proven that you can take issues that are going to appeal to independents and even Democrats and win them over, win the hearts and minds without compromising an ounce of your conservative credentials and your fidelity to limited government principles. So it's going to be a fun thing to watch.
Yeah.
You just touched on something we've said on this show several times, and that is politics is math. And it's a mathematics of addition, not subtraction. And Republicans have seemed to have forgotten that the last couple cycles. They think they can run on one brand, this Trumpian brand, and bring everybody with them kicking and screaming. Well, actually, everyone's kicking and screaming the other direction or not voting at all. And we saw that here in Arizona.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
No, it wasn't down ticket voting. It was no, yes, yes, yes for Republicans.
Right.
The debate is still going on. I got into it online the other day with somebody about who just believes with their whole heart that Kari Lake won the election. And I'm like, The math, it doesn't add up. I'm sorry. It doesn't add up. You need to go back to grade school and figure it out.
Yeah, and look at like in Arizona, you look at your treasurer, Kimberly Yee,
Yeah,
who
right.
was the biggest vote.
56%.
Yeah,
And that's really, as I've said this before on the podcast, that's our baseline in Arizona.
Yeah.
The typical Republican baseline is a 56% performance in a midterm. 57 is what Ducey got in his reelect. So that's, we are technically, should be a red state, but for crappy candidates who lose to
If all
Democrats.
you do is play to that 20 to 30% of the electorate, and that's all you do leading up to the election, you're going to lose.
you'll lose.
And that's what we saw this last cycle. And so with the work that you guys are doing, trying to give, principled conservatives, principled messaging, not shying away from these issues, which I think a lot of conservatives and Republicans do. It's because the other side is so militant and so engaged. I think it's vitally important. I'm just applauding you tooth and nail on this, because the papers that you're putting out, the research you're putting out, and also the arguments you're embracing is really helpful for those who want to take advantage of it and run with it.
yeah. John, just if I could just use a sports metaphor, since we're heading into Super Bowl week, and the group of Kansas City Chiefs.
Yeah, you're lucky you're there, John. You're
Yeah.
not here in Arizona. It is a zoo.
Busy.
So when you think about the last time when the Chiefs lost to the Buccaneers, they got destroyed. It was one of the most painful games I've watched as a football fan. Of course, they'd won the year before against the Niners. But when they lost, both Andy Reid and Patrick Mahomes and everyone in the Chiefs organization said, we're going to use this as motivation to get better. We're going to improve. And there's a culture within sports fandom, and most normal, regular Americans engage in this. They think about it. They expect and demand that their coaches, when they lose a game, whatever sport it is, baseball, football, basketball, you don't say the game was stolen from me. Even if there may have been one or two questionable calls, there's always 1,000 other things that you could have done differently. The answer is always, I'm going to get better. I'm going to improve. And if they don't respond that way, they get fired because they don't improve. And as a political party, why can we not hold our elected officials to the same standard we hold our football coaches? I mean, why
Great point.
that's the connection that Republican voters have to make is you expect your sports teams to do better when they lose. Well, we need to expect the same of our candidates and not let them get away with, again, this crybaby conservative victimization shtick. And it's deadly for us as a country. So whatever you guys are doing in Arizona to help that process, I applaud you, and we're with you. And not to say that the people that have those concerns, like, they're not all conspiracy theorists. There's very legitimate, proper questions to be raised about elections all over the country. And it's very well possible in certain states that games can be played and an election really could be stolen. But when you take situations where there clearly is no evidence of a theft, then you undermine your own legitimate concerns about it. And that's what's happened all over the country. And it's just, we focused on stopping the wrong steal. The steal that's ongoing is the stealing of our freedom, the stealing of our opportunity, and the stealing of our tax dollars to finance this kind of left-wing socialist agenda.
Well, you put it really well, that it's just so not the conservative way to be the victim and to claim victimization. And that's exactly what Trump has done. And all these people who, they stole the election. No, they didn't. You lost it, period. John, how can people find you?
Well, unless you're the Dodgers pointing the finger at the Houston Astros.
Well,
Then you can legitimately say
when it's legitimately
it was
stolen.
There's
We
always
need
an
to find
exception.
more of those examples if we're going to make the argument that something was stolen.
point.
Because
Good
I
point.
will say unequivocally, the Houston Astros did steal the World Series.
cheated.
They cheated.
But John, how can people find you and get more informed on all the great stuff that you guys are doing?
Yeah, thanks. You can follow us at c3newsmag.com or c3solutions.org. And you can check us out. We do a lot of news coverage on this debate about economic freedom and the environment. So please follow us. Sign up for our newsletter. That's actually the best ways. Go onto our sites and sign up for our newsletter, and you'll get kind of a summary every week of what we're up to.
Great. Well,
That's
thank
awesome.
you for taking the time today. We appreciate you.
Thank you for your friendship, all the great work that you've done, and hope to see you soon. Hope you can make it out here one of these days.
Yeah.
Come
Come
on to our
soon
studio
before it gets
live.
too hot. Come before it gets too hot. So,
Thanks, guys.
all right.
All right. God bless.
Thanks, John. Thanks, everybody. Take care.